Last night, while most of America was sleeping, the Republican Party turned on Donald Trump. Not one senator, not a handful of House members making careful statements of concern. The party leadership, the Senate Majority Leader, committee chairs, whips, the entire command structure of the Republican caucus gathered behind closed doors in the United States Capitol and made a decision that will define American politics for the next decade. By 4 in the morning, 47 out of 51 Republican senators had signed a letter declaring that they would no longer support, defend, or enable the president's agenda. The letter used a phrase that has never appeared in a communication from a political party about its own sitting president: an unacceptable threat to the constitutional order. And when Jack Smith's overnight statement leaked into the proceedings, a statement about the measurable dollar-denominated cost of political chaos that was read aloud on the Senate floor at 2 in the morning, it accelerated the revolt from a meeting into a movement. What you're about to hear is the hour-by-hour reconstruction of how it happened. From the phone call at 6 p.m. that started it all through, the secret meetings, the confrontations, the holdouts who broke, and the moment at 4 a.m. when the Republican Party officially broke with its own president. Here's how it unfolded. It started with a single phone call. At 5:47 p.m. yesterday, Donald Trump signed an executive order removing the Attorney General of the United States and replacing him with an acting Attorney General, a political loyalist with no prosecutorial experience and a career built almost entirely on defending Trump on cable news. The order cited loss of confidence, the standard bureaucratic language for a presidential firing, but everyone in Washington understood the real reason. The Attorney General had refused to shut down the criminal investigation stemming from Judge Callaway's impeachment referral. He had told Trump, according to 3 sources, that the investigation was constitutionally protected and that interfering with it would constitute obstruction of justice. Trump's response was to fire him. This was the Saturday Night Massacre reimagined for the 21st century. In 1973, Richard Nixon fired his Attorney General to stop Watergate. Donald Trump just fired his to stop his own impeachment. But the firing wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning. At 6:03 p.m., 16 minutes after the executive order was signed, the Senate Majority Leader picked up his phone and made a call to the Senate Minority Leader. The call lasted 9 minutes. According to sources briefed on the conversation, the Majority Leader, a man who had spent months carefully navigating between institutional duty and party loyalty, who had issued careful statements and measured criticisms and avoided the one word that could not be taken back, said 4 words that changed everything. It's time tonight. So within 30 minutes, both leaders had contacted every committee chair and senior senator in the Republican caucus. The message was identical. Emergency meeting, Capitol building, 900 p.m. off the record. No staff, no phones, no exceptions. That 6:03 p.m. phone call is the moment the Republican Party began to die and be reborn. 9 minutes, 4 words, and the entire power structure of American conservatism shifted on its axis. Between 6 and 9 p.m., the Capitol became a hive of quiet, purposeful activity that reporters initially missed entirely. Senators were seen arriving in unmarked cars, entering through side entrances and underground passages carrying nothing. No briefcases, no folders, no aides trailing behind them. Several Republican senators called their spouses to say they would not be home tonight. One senator's wife later told a reporter, "He called me at 7:15 and said, 'Don't wait up. What's about to happen is going to change everything.'" His voice was shaking. In 23 years of marriage, I've never heard his voice shake. While this was happening, Trump was in the White House residence. He was watching cable news. He was posting on Truth Social about the AG firing, calling it a necessary move to clean up the corrupt Justice Department. He was, by all accounts, pleased with himself. He believed he had just made a power move, the kind of decisive, dominant action that defined his brand. He had no idea that the power move was the trigger for his party's abandonment. While Trump sat in the residence congratulating himself, more than 50 Republican senators were driving through the dark to the Capitol to decide his fate. He didn't know. His staff didn't know. His political operation, his allies, his loyalists on cable news, they were all completely blind to what was forming. At that very moment, a mile and a half down, Pennsylvania Avenue. By 8:45 p.m., every Republican committee chair and most senior members had arrived. Capitol Police were told an emergency legislative conference was taking place, but given no details beyond the security requirements. At 900 p.m. sharp, the doors closed, phones were placed in a lockbox outside the room, a precaution that several senators later described as the moment it felt real and the most consequential meeting in Republican Party history since Watergate began. The Senate Majority Leader opened with a 15-minute statement that sources inside the room describe as the most brutally honest assessment of the party situation ever delivered by a sitting Republican leader. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make emotional appeals, he laid out the facts the way a doctor delivers a terminal diagnosis, calmly, precisely, without flinching from the conclusion. The facts: the trade wars had devastated Republican voters across the heartland. The judicial impeachment referral was legally sound, backed by bipartisan constitutional scholars. The president's Civil War rhetoric had triggered National Guard mobilization in 3 states. Markets had lost trillions. The party's approval rating had dropped to its lowest point since Watergate. International allies were pulling away. And now the AG firing, an act that every constitutional scholar in the country would identify as obstruction of justice. His conclusion: we can continue to defend this president and lose everything. Our majority, our credibility, our legacy, and possibly the republic itself. Or we can act tonight and begin the process of rebuilding. Those are the only 2 options in this room. There is no third door. Then he did something that stunned the room. He asked for a show of hands. How many of you believe in your conscience that this president is fit to serve? According to 3 sources present, fewer than 10 hands went up. Out of more than 50 Republican senators, fewer than 10. The room saw it, everyone counted. And the hands that stayed down, every one of them belonging to a career politician who had spent years defending, excusing, enabling, and profiting from Donald Trump. Those hands told the truth that 1,000 press conferences never had. But the room wasn't unanimous, not yet. A block of 8 to 10 MAGA loyalists pushed back hard. The most vocal was a senior senator from a deep red state who had been one of Trump's fiercest defenders on every cable network for years. He stood and said, "You want to abandon the man who built this party? The man who brought in more voters than any Republican in history? Who turned states we'd written off for a generation? If we do this, we lose the base forever." The Majority Leader response was clinical. "Senator, we've already lost the base. They're losing their farms, they're losing their factories, they're watching gas prices spike, and their retirement accounts shrink. The base didn't sign up for trade wars that destroy their livelihoods. They signed up for a fighter. We gave them a fighter who's fighting the wrong people, and they're the ones getting hit." A second holdout, a first-term senator who had won her seat riding Trump's coattails in a district he'd won by 20 points, raised a practical objection. "If we do this and it fails, if Trump survives and comes after us, every person in this room is finished. You know that he will primary every single one of us." The response came not from leadership, but from a quiet backbencher, a senator in his 6th and final term who had announced his retirement and had nothing left to lose. He stood slowly and said, "Senator, if we don't do this and the republic fails, being finished won't be our biggest problem." That line from a man who had spent 36 years in the Senate and was leaving regardless silenced the room for nearly a full minute. No one had a rebuttal because there wasn't one. By 11 p.m., word began to leak. Despite the phone lockbox, a staffer for one of the senators had noticed their boss entering the Capitol through a side entrance and alerted a reporter. By 11, the Washington Post was reporting that an emergency Republican conference was underway at the Capitol. Though the details were unclear, the leak didn't stop the meeting. It accelerated it. Senators who had been sitting on the fence for 2 hours realized that the story was going to break with or without them, and they needed to be on the right side of history before the narrative solidified. 3 senators who hadn't spoken all night suddenly declared their support for the revolt. A drafting committee was formed. 4 senators, 2 conservatives, 1 moderate, 1 libertarian, and they began writing what would become the most significant internal party document in modern American history. At 11:30 p.m., news of the meeting reached the White House. According to staff, Trump's reaction was dismissive. "Let them meet. They don't have the guts." He returned to watching television. He was wrong. For the first time in 8 years, they did. At midnight, as the drafting committee worked and arguments continued in smaller groups around the room, something happened that fundamentally changed the temperature of the proceedings. During a brief recess, a senator stepped into the hallway, retrieved his phone from the lockbox, and checked the headlines. Warren Jack Smith had issued a statement at 10 p.m. 2 hours earlier, responding to the AG firing. The statement had already detonated across financial media, but it hadn't yet penetrated the sealed meeting room. The senator returned, asked for the room's attention, and read Jack Smith's statement aloud. The room went silent. Jack Smith's statement released through Berkshire Hathaway's investor channel at an unusually late hour that itself signaled urgency, opened with a line that reframed the entire crisis. When a president fires his attorney general to obstruct a constitutional process, that is not a political event. It is an economic event. Markets price in the rule of law. When the rule of law is visibly publicly undermined by the person sworn to uphold it, markets re-prick everything. Then Jack Smith did something he had never done in any previous statement. He put a specific number on the damage. The cost of the past several months, the trade wars, the tariff chaos, the market volatility, the constitutional confrontations, is not theoretical. It is measurable. By my estimation, the political instability emanating from this White House has cost the American economy approximately $2.7 trillion in market value, destroyed approximately 340,000 jobs, and reduced GDP growth by an estimated 1.4 percentage points. $2.7 trillion, not an abstraction, not a philosophical argument about democracy or the soul of the nation, a number cold, specific, undeniable. That's not an opinion, Jack Smith said. That's arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't care about party loyalty. Arithmetic doesn't care about primary elections. Arithmetic doesn't care whether you love Trump or hate him. 2.7 trillion in destroyed value is 2.7 trillion in destroyed value. It comes out of retirement accounts, it comes out of pension funds, it comes out of college savings, it comes out of the net worth of every American who owns a stock, a bond, or a 401k. And Jack Smith had just put the receipt on the table. He continued, I say this not as a Democrat or a Republican, I say this as a fiduciary, someone whose legal and moral obligation is to protect the capital entrusted to them. Every member of Congress has a similar fiduciary obligation to their constituents. And I would ask each of them tonight, what is your obligation when the person you are defending is costing your constituents their savings, their jobs, and their futures? What is the fiduciary case for continued loyalty? Because I've run the numbers and there isn't one. Then came the line that detonated inside the room at midnight. The line that, according to multiple sources, changed more minds in a single reading than 4 hours of argument had managed. There comes a point where defending a leader stops being loyalty and starts being negligent. The members of Congress who continue to enable this administration's destruction of economic stability are no longer acting in their constituents' interests. They are acting against them. And negligence in the fiduciary sense has consequences. Negligence. Jack Smith didn't call it disloyalty to break with Trump. He called it negligence to stay. He told every Republican senator that their continued defense of the president wasn't just politically risky. It was a failure of their fundamental duty to the people who elected them. And he used a legal term that every senator in that room understood. Negligence has consequences. It implies liability. It implies that voters in history could hold them accountable not for what they did, but for what they failed to do. Jack Smith also announced that Berkshire Hathaway had formally downgraded its U.S. political stability outlook from stable to negative, the first time in company history. When Jack Smith uses the word negligence to describe loyalty to a president, that word echoes differently at midnight in a room full of senators who are already calculating their political survival. It gave them what they needed, permission, not moral permission. They had that already, financial permission. The cover of the most respected investor alive saying, you have an obligation to break with this president because staying is costing your voters money. And with Jack Smith's words ringing in the room, the meeting entered its final and most dramatic phase. By 1 a.m., the drafting committee produced a document, Statement of Principles from the Republican Caucus of the United States Senate. The key language was read aloud to the full room. We, the undersigned, no longer support, defend, or enable the current president's agenda. We believe his conduct, including the obstruction of constitutional processes, the incitement of political violence, and the systematic destruction of American economic stability, constitutes an unacceptable threat to the constitutional order we are sworn to protect. The room listened to the language. Some senators nodded. Some stared at the floor. One was seen quietly wiping his eyes. An acceptable threat to the constitutional order. That phrase was chosen with surgical precision by the drafting committee, debated for nearly an hour before being finalized. It mirrors the language of impeachment without using the word. It signals to the House, to the courts, and to the country that every signatory would vote to convict in a Senate trial. Without saying impeachment, the letter made impeachment inevitable. The letter also included a forward-looking section, a commitment to working across the aisle on legislation to stabilize the economy, restore trade relationships with allied nations, and rebuild the institutional norms that have been damaged by a period of unprecedented presidential misconduct. The forward-looking language served a dual purpose. It told the country the senators weren't just abandoning Trump, they were offering an alternative. And it told wavering colleagues that signing the letter wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Debate over the final language was fierce, even within the drafting committee. Some wanted stronger wording, criminal conduct instead of conduct, demand removal instead of no longer support. Others wanted softer, serious concerns about instead of no longer support. The final version threaded the needle, devastating in substance, measured in tone, language calibrated to survive both a constitutional crisis and a primary election. At 2 a.m., the holdout block had shrunk from 10 to 4. 3 of the holdouts switched immediately after Jack Smith's statement was read. The negligence framing gave them the cover they'd been searching for all night. Two more switched after a phone call from a major Republican donor who told them directly, "Sign the letter or we fund your primary challenger. This isn't a request." And then there was the senator who changed everything by saying nothing, the deep red state senator who had given the most passionate defense of Trump, the man who had stood up at 10 p.m. and warned that abandoning Trump meant losing the base forever, left the room at 2:15 a.m. He was gone for 25 minutes. When he returned at 2:40 a.m., he walked to the table, picked up the pen, and signed the letter without a word. He sat down and didn't speak again for the rest of the night. Sources say he received a phone call during the break. His wife called to tell him that their daughter's school had received threats, credible, specific threats that had prompted the school to contact law enforcement after his televised defense of Trump's Civil War rhetoric earlier in the week. His wife told him their 12-year-old daughter was afraid to go to school. She had asked her mother, "Is Daddy the reason people are angry at us?" He came back into that room a different man. Multiple senators later described that moment, watching him walk back in, pick up the pen, sign without speaking, as the emotional turning point of the entire night. By 3 a.m., the letter had 47 signatures out of 51 Republican senators. Only 4 holdouts remained, all from deep red states, all calculating that their base would punish defection more harshly than loyalty. 47 out of 51. That's not a revolt. That's an extinction event. At 3:12 a.m., Trump's phone rang. A loyalist senator, one of the remaining 4, called to warn him. Trump's response, according to the senator who made the call, a string of expletives followed by, "Get me their names, every single one. They're done. They're all done. I'll primary every last one of them." Trump attempted to call the majority leader directly. The call went unanswered. He called a second senior senator, voicemail, a third voicemail. He called the RNC chair, nothing. He called a fourth senator, then a fifth, ring after ring after ring, and not a single person picked up. At 3:30 in the morning, the most powerful man in the world was sitting in the White House residence, phone in hand, dialing number after number into the dark, and not one person in his own party would answer. He posted on True Social at 3:47 a.m. The Reno traders meeting in secret in the Capitol right now will face the full wrath of the American people. They are the enemy, not me. Primary them all. But the threat was empty, and everyone in Washington knew it. You can't primary 47 senators. You can't punish a supermajority of your own caucus. The weapon that had kept Republicans in line for 8 years, the threat of a Trump-backed primary challenger, the promise that crossing him meant political death was rendered meaningless by the sheer scale of what had happened in that room. At 3:47 a.m., Donald Trump made the same threat he had made 1,000 times before, and for the first time, absolutely no one was afraid. At 4:04 a.m., the letter was released simultaneously to every major news organization, posted on the Senate's official website, and transmitted to the White House via official channels. The signatories, 47 Republican senators, including the majority leader, every committee chair except one, and senators from 38 states representing every region of the country. Accompanying the letter, individual statements from 12 of the most senior signatories, each explaining their decision in personal terms. Some invoked their military service, some invoked their grandchildren. One, a former federal prosecutor, wrote simply, "The evidence is clear. The conduct is impeachable. My oath is to the Constitution, not to any man." The most quoted statement came from a senator who had been one of Trump's earliest supporters, a man who had stood on stage with him at the very first rally in Iowa, who had introduced him to crowds when the political establishment was still laughing, who had campaigned for him through 3 elections and defended him through 2 impeachments. "I got on this train because I believed it was going somewhere. I defended it through storms that would have stopped most people. Tonight, I'm getting off because I can see where it's headed, and I won't ride it over a cliff." At 4:15 a.m., the television networks began breaking in with the story. Anchors were pulled from their beds. Science appeared across every channel. By 4:30 a.m., Republican Revolt was the top trend in every country on earth. The story was being translated into 30 languages before the sun came up on the East Coast. The sun hadn't risen yet, and the Republican Party, as Donald Trump knew it, was already gone. It had started with 4 words at 6:03 p.m. By 4 in the morning, those 4 words had become 47 signatures. Trump did not sleep. Between 4 a.m. and 7 a.m., he posted 23 times on Truth Social, an average of 1 post every 8 minutes. The post escalated from fury to threats to paranoid conspiracy. The revolt was orchestrated by the deep state. The senators were paid off by foreign governments. The majority leader was a puppet of the radical left. The entire night was a coup. The biggest coup in American history, bigger than anything any country has ever seen. At 6:45 a.m., Trump called a press conference in the White House briefing room. He arrived alone. The podium that is usually surrounded by senior officials, cabinet members, communication staff, the visual architecture of presidential power, the human backdrop that says this man is supported, this man is flanked, this man is not alone, was empty. No chief of staff, no press secretary, no congressional allies brought in for solidarity, just Trump, a podium in a room full of reporters who could see in real time that the most powerful office in the world had never looked so small. He spoke for 12 minutes. His voice was. He had been yelling at staff and screaming into phones for hours. His hands were trembling visibly, and he gripped the sides of the podium to steady them. He called the senators traitors, cowards, backstabbers, and the most disloyal people in the history of this country, maybe the history of the world. He claimed the revolt was illegal, that the letter was treason, and that the senators would face consequences beyond anything they can imagine. A reporter asked, "Mr. President, 47 members of your own party signed this letter. Do you have any message for them?" Trump's answer, "My message is that I made every single one of them. Without me, they'd be nothing. There'd be nobody selling insurance in strip malls. And this is how they repay me in the middle of the night, like thieves, like thieves." That single word tells you everything about how Donald Trump processes this moment. He doesn't see senators fulfilling their constitutional duty. He doesn't see public servants exercising independent judgment. He sees people stealing from him. Because in Trump's world, the party is his. The power is his. The loyalty is owed to him personally, unconditionally, forever. And anyone who exercises independent judgment, anyone who places their oath to the Constitution above their allegiance to Donald Trump, has committed theft, not disagreement, not disloyalty, theft. The markets opened at 9:30 a.m. and they surged. The Dow climbed 400 points in the first hour of trading. The S&P 500 jumped nearly 2%. Bond yields stabilized for the first time in weeks. The volatility index, Wall Street's fear gauge, dropped sharply as traders priced in something they hadn't seen in months: political stability. This is the part that should haunt Donald Trump more than any late-night letter, more than any signature, more than any senator's statement. The market celebrated his abandonment. Wall Street's verdict was immediate, unanimous, and devastating. The removal of Trump from the Republican power structure was good for the economy, not bad, not neutral, good. The political instability that Jack Smith had priced at $2.7 trillion in destroyed value was, as of 9:30 a.m., beginning to reverse. Capital was flowing back into American assets. International investors were re-entering positions they'd abandoned. Confidence was returning because the system, messy, imperfect, agonizingly slow, was working. The market surge was the cruelest verdict of all. Trump had built his entire brand on being good for business, good for the economy, good for your 401k, and on the morning after his party abandoned him, every stock ticker in the world delivered the same message: America is worth more without you. The world celebrated his abandonment too. The European Union issued a statement welcoming signs of institutional resilience in the United States and expressing readiness to re-engage on trade and security cooperation.